You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app, or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
August recess has arrived. Don't think that means a lack of news throughout August because, well, we've got a presidential race to cover. And I'm delighted to say that Amy Walter is with us here from, of course, the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. She's on the masthead here. And Amy, it's great to have you back as we consider your new race ratings that really jumped off the page for a lot of people this week, suggesting that we're really looking at 4 toss-ups this time: Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I'm going to ask you about what the candidates are up to because we do have some important stuff with the Lincoln dinner in Iowa, a new bus tour for Ron DeSantis. But when you start looking down the road, Amy, how do you bring it down to only 4 states?
Yeah, thank you for having me. We've been seeing for the last few cycles, not just 2016, not just 2020, but go all the way back to 2008. So between 2008 and 2020, only 10 states have flipped between Democrat and Republican in that time period. So the rest of those, 40 states have voted Democrat every single one of those 4 elections, or Republican every single one of those 4 elections. Some of those 10 are now pretty much off the page. Ohio, Iowa, even Florida, states that used to be our staple battlegrounds. All of us who covered campaigns, covered elections, had to spend at least a week in Ohio to understand what was happening in election, right? As Ohio goes, so goes presidential. Not so much anymore. Those are red states now, and we put those into the safe Republican category. But Arizona and Georgia, we hadn't been paying a whole lot of attention to Arizona and Georgia before 2016, and they are now firmly in the toss-up category. And Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, quite frankly, Wisconsin, I would say, is the more, it's much more toss-up-y than Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania probably is a tinge more, if I had to put a thumb on the scale, a tinge more Democratic leaning than toss-up. But Wisconsin, boy, that state in the last 2 elections has been critical, and only by a handful of votes. So last election, 42,000 votes spread across 3 states: Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, determined the election. That's what put Joe Biden in the White House in 2016. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, 79,000 votes across those 3 states, put Donald Trump in the White House. So I think if we're looking then for any sort of surprises outside of those states, North Carolina, a state that's been sort of trending toward the Democrats, but is still tantalizingly, it's so close, but tantalizingly far, right? 2 points. It's like I always say, it's like that, you just need to lose the last 5 pounds. It doesn't seem hard until you go, wait a minute.
How true.
It takes a lot of work. And Nevada's that way for Republicans. It looks so close. Every election, 2 points. Maybe it's 3 points. Maybe it's 1 point. But still, they can't quite get over the hump. So we'll be paying attention to those places as well. But just think about all the money that's going to get spent, Joe. All those millions and billions of dollars concentrated in those handful of states. If you live there, I'm very sorry. Because
you will not be able to hide.
You will not. Nothing you do. You can, your TV, anything you're getting on social media, anytime you open the internet, anytime you open your mailbox, it will be full.
Well, so you just went through a lot. I want to unpack a little bit of it here before I bring you back to Georgia, for instance. Is Nevada that difficult for Republicans because of the Strip, because of the SEIU, because of Latino workers on the Strip, or is that in a position now where it's helping Republicans?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So you have in Nevada, not just that you have a really strong labor presence in Las Vegas, but where you're seeing a lot of growth in the state is actually up in Reno, Washoe County, which borders up against California. It's a place that is attracting a lot of folks, especially a lot of younger folks. you can live in Nevada and pay Nevada prices, but also go over the border and go to Tahoe, right?
Yes, right.
And it is a place that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, safely Republican. Actually, even in 2016, it was pretty safely Republican. This last election, Biden carried Washoe County by 5 points. So it's the Strip in Clark County, which is Las Vegas, very important, but Washoe is also important for Democrats. The other thing is, it's obviously a very diverse state, not just Latino, but Asian American population growing very quickly, has a significant African American population. Republicans have made some inroads there, especially Donald Trump with Latino voters in that state. And that's the question: is as new voters come in to the process, either because they moved there recently or because they're now aging in as voters, where do they go? And I think you're right that for years, the Culinary Union was successful in ensuring that those folks stayed on the Democratic side.
Right.
Some of them are now saying, well, you know what? I kind of like what I'm hearing from Republicans, whether it's on cultural issues or economic issues. And for Democrats to continue to be successful, they can't afford to lose much more of that vote.
We're spending time with Amy Walter on Bloomberg Sound On. I'm really compelled by Georgia. We were there for the Senate runoff, the at least the most recent Senate runoff for Raphael Warnock, and there was talk about Georgia turning purple, or maybe it was a future Democrat haven. But we have to remind ourselves that every other statewide candidate who won in the election was Republican. How do you describe Georgia right now?
Oh my gosh, it is kind of, in some ways it's easy and difficult to describe Georgia. It is a 50-50 state. That is absolutely clear. I guess the way to describe Georgia is you think about it as Atlanta and Atlanta suburbs versus the rest of the state. And what makes, say, Georgia different from North Carolina, why Georgia ended up in the Democratic column and North Carolina is still holding on in the Republican column, is the size of the metro areas in those states. Atlanta is just a huge metro area, and so it attracts obviously a lot more people. The density in and around Atlanta is just a lot bigger than Charlotte or the Research Triangle in North Carolina, and those suburbs, again, not that long ago, Mitt Romney was easily carrying the suburbs around Atlanta. And now they're going 65% for Democrats. So the story of Georgia really is the suburbs. And if you look at how did Brian Kemp win and Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate, lose? It's not that Brian Kemp won the suburbs. He just didn't lose them by as big of a percentage as
Well, you wonder about
Walker
the Trump
did.
factor in Georgia as well, because that's turned out to not be a very friendly state for him, even though it's teeming with Republicans. And I have to ask you, since you're with us, I could spend all day on the map with you. It's just fascinating. But I'd love to ask you about the two front runners, if we can still call Ron DeSantis that. He's kicking off the Iowa bus tour here with the Super PAC. And he will be sharing a stage, maybe not at the same time, with Donald Trump at the Lincoln dinner this weekend. But we got more news on the former president yesterday with these additional obstruction charges. And I just wonder if you see this having any impact in the race.
It is almost as if for many Republican voters, this news is just more white noise. It's there in the background, but it's not really breaking through, in part because so many of those voters believe that all of this is politically motivated, and there's not any reason to believe that this should be taken seriously. They see that he has been targeted from the moment he walked into office, whether it was by Mueller or Democrats on committees investigating him. In fact, he's been impeached twice, and they say this is all bunk. At the same time, it is clear that whatever message that Ron DeSantis thought he could take to the uh, to the nomination, it just isn't sticking. Voters don't seem to be all that enthralled with this idea that they can get a woke warrior in Ron DeSantis, and that's what they want over somebody that they already know and like in Donald Trump, and they know what they're going to get in Donald Trump. So I think DeSantis has two challenges. One, the fact that things that would probably derail any other candidate in history, multiple indictments, having little impact in this Republican primary. And the second being that he just hasn't found a compelling case for why voters, if it's not because of the indictments, why else should voters pick Ron DeSantis over Trump? He tried and continues to try sort of the generational thing.
Yep.
But yes, it is technically true that Donald Trump is not much younger than Joe Biden, but he doesn't look or act
Yes, right.
as old as he does, right? So you don't look at him and think, boy, that guy is as old as he is. And that this issue of electability that I think was working for Ron DeSantis at the end of 2022 just doesn't seem as relevant now, in part because Donald Trump still, if you look at all the polling, he's trailing Biden, but not by a lot, or in some cases he's tied. It's kind of like we're starting 2024 where we ended 2020. And so the argument for electability doesn't sort of seem as powerful. And then finally, I just don't think he's captured the imagination of these voters. Right. Donald Trump came from basically 0% in the polls in 2015 to leading, in part because people couldn't look away from him, right? He captured their attention in a way that no other politician could do, no traditional politician could do. And he still is able to do that. And there are very few people who can compete on that level.
Well, let me run this by you. I only have about a minute left. I hate to say this, but new numbers from Ohio Northern University show DeSantis falling behind Vivek Ramaswamy. 9% here. He's obviously been struggling in the polls recently as they try to reset. Listen to this moment in Iowa when he's kind of doing the rope line here, and he talks to, maybe you saw this, a young kid who's got an icy, keeping in mind that he's been criticized a lot for not having a lot of skill as a retail politician. Here's Ron DeSantis.
Oh, what is that? An icy? Yeah, that's probably a lot of sugar, huh? Good to see you.
It's probably a lot of sugar, Amy. Good to see you.
Yes, although I know. As a parent, well, now it's no longer a young kid, but of a young kid, I do remember thinking, oh man, that parent is good luck with that, man. That kid is going to be bouncing off the walls for a month. And but I think we also looked at Donald Trump in 2015 and said, this guy doesn't do retail, right? He doesn't want to go to he doesn't want to go and
start shaking
greed
up the
and
diners.
backslap, and he's not carrying babies. But what he does do in his rallies, what he did do remember when he brought his helicopter and let people get in the helicopter?
Right. It's like an air show.
It was like a whole different category. And I think, again, it just gets right back to you're running against somebody who is not a traditional politician.
Yeah.
If you are a
I think you put it best when you said he captured the imagination. Amy Walter, this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
They had one job. Delete the video. That was it. But the grand jury investigating the classified documents case still obtained and reviewed the footage of two Mar-a-Lago employees who were charged with the job of deleting the tape. I know it's not tape, but it sounds better when you say that. And I'm old. As I read from the timeline on the terminal, June 24, 2022, Trump aide Walt Nauta texts, Mar-a-Lago's maintenance worker, director of information technology, asking, "Hey, bro, you around this weekend?" That was at 5:02 p.m. 5:05 p.m. Nada texts Carlos de Oliveira. This is the other individual who is charged now, asking, "Hey, brother, you working today?" De Oliveira confirms he's working. Nada calls him. They speak for 2 minutes. De Oliveira instructs a valet not to tell anyone that Nada is coming because he wanted the trip to remain secret. He said the boss wants the footage to be deleted. De Oliveira, fast forward to June 27, tells the IT director at Mar-a-Lago he wants to bring him into a small audio closet near a ballroom, says the conversation should remain between the two of them. Turns out the footage is kept on a server for about 45 days, says the boss wants it deleted. A lot more texting through the course of the day. Until about 1:31 p.m., de Oliveira walks through the bushes at the northern end of the property to meet with Nada on an adjacent property. They met in the bushes. But the grand jury still got the tape, obtained it, reviewed the surveillance footage showing the movement of the boxes. Let's reassemble the panel for a Friday. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are here, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, I don't know your thoughts here. I don't know that a couple extra charges make a difference, but when you read this kind of stuff, it makes G. Gordon Liddy sound like he had something going.
Yeah, didn't he say he was prepared to be taken out standing on a street corner, just tell me where to stand?
Yeah.
This is really just like harkens back all that kind of thing. It's nuts. You could tell they thought they were under surveillance or would be. They sounded guilty as heck that they were doing something wrong. It's just not the conduct of people who think they're law-abiding citizens going about their daily business. And I did think the most interesting part of all that was, the maintenance worker says, "Well, I don't know how to delete any of this stuff." It was excellent.
If only they had waited 45 days for the auto delete.
Just turn another corner. Caught them red-handed, and it's really interesting to see how this classified documents case takes its twists and turns. And so we've been waiting for the second foot to drop in the DOJ, and I guess we got 1.5 foot dropped, just in addition to the existing case. So kind of took all the steam out of the interest in the January 6th indictments. But it just does show how much trouble this president and his Confederates are with trying to lie and defraud the FBI.
What does a story like this do to the narrative? The gang that couldn't shoot straight here, Jeanne, it doesn't create a lot of confidence in this team's ability to run the country, does it?
It does not. I mean, you read it and it reads like a movie script. And when you were just going through some of it, Joe, it's actually gripping to read. And, it paints a picture of essentially obstruction upon obstruction, right? They were obstructing when they were moving the boxes. Then they realize there's a subpoena for the tapes. So they start to try to cover that up. And of course, then they're doing, sort of things that even a 5-year-old knows not to do if you're going to be doing something in violation of a subpoena, like sending emojis that say, shh, to your, compatriot or something. So the really sad part of this is that this is obviously a former president, but the two people involved now whose lives are going to be unalterably destroyed unless they decide to cooperate, a body man and a maintenance worker turned valet maintenance worker turned property manager that Donald Trump has used to further this plot to mishandle classified documents at his golf course.
Well, you'd think this is a big opening for the governor of Florida. But as I mentioned with Amy Walter, Rick, we've got a poll here from, this is just one poll, but Ohio Northern University says Vivek Ramaswamy is doing better in the Republican primary than Ron DeSantis. Ramaswamy 12, DeSantis 9. And it comes after a lot of polls that have showed DeSantis struggling to keep up with Donald Trump. He's resetting his campaign, we're told. He's on a new bus tour this weekend, and he's got a whole other matter dealing with the curriculum in Florida public schools when it comes to Black history. He was asked about this, and I would love to have both of you respond to it. Asked about this by a reporter while he's working the trail in Iowa. Here is how it went.
At the end of the day, you got to choose. Are you going to side with Kamala Harris in liberal media outlets? Or are you going to side with the state of Florida? And I think it's very clear that these guys did a good job on those standards. It wasn't anything that was politically motivated. These are serious scholars. You've seen Dr. Allen out on TV talking about the stories, talking about his own family history and everything like that. So don't side with Kamala on that.
So it turns out he does know how to pronounce her name, but he also berated that reporter for not reading the text, Rick, for not being up to date on things. How long is this going to follow Ron DeSantis? And do you believe these poll numbers?
I think the poll numbers are easy to explain. The two of them came out of the chute together. Vivek spent all his time and a lot of money introducing himself to the voters in these states that are early primary states by doing bios ads and lots of advertising around who he is and what he represents and where he fits in the Republican Party, right? Brand new entity in Republican Party politics, and he's done it the right way by saying, before I really get into what I'm going to do as president, I'm going to tell you who I am. DeSantis did exactly the opposite. He came out of Florida assuming everybody knew who he was, that he was going to win this nomination, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn the United States into the state of Florida.
Right.
And everybody was scratching their head going, well, who are you? Because people in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Texas, they don't know who Ron DeSantis is. And so it's not shocking to me that he's lost steam because he's just been ill-defined. And it doesn't shock me that Ramaswamy has started to build a real campaign from the bottom up. And that's how you do it if you want to actually compete.
I don't know if the Ohio number jumps off the page for you, Jeanne, but Trump is leading DeSantis by 34 percentage points in the Real Clear Politics average of polls. What can he do? What can Ron DeSantis do this weekend in Iowa? They're going to be on the same stage, as I mentioned, for the Lincoln dinner, I believe, tomorrow night. How does he use this opportunity?
I think it's very tough considering the bind he's got himself in. And I just want to add to what Rick was talking about. In addition to not introducing himself, what people do know about Ron DeSantis now is not a positive picture. Let's not forget, you've got the overreach this legislative session on abortion. It's not just Dobbs. That's 15 weeks. You go down to 6 weeks. He's attacking businesses. He's got a really, really stringent immigration policy. And let's not forget, people in Florida are having trouble insuring their homes. The Republicans control the entire government. They're not addressing that in an appropriate way. And inflation, Florida, 7%, highest in the country. So how is that, I'm going to Floridify the country, a winning message on anybody's agenda? So I think it's very tough for Ron DeSantis. And his lane, and I know that, some people don't like the lane word, his lane through Trump or by Trump was to appeal to people who were never Trumpers, never MAGA people who were moving away from Trump. And he's done anything but appeal to them. And the number that sticks out with me is that he has lost tremendous ground with educated Republicans. And Donald Trump has gained a slight amount. So that is a telling statistic because those are the people who were anti-Trump to begin with on the Republican side.
Pretty interesting stuff here. Rick, what would you tell Ron DeSantis to do at the Lincoln dinner this weekend to get the attention he needs?
Attack Donald Trump. He's, as Jeanne said, danced around it. His super PAC has not spent any time thinking about it. They're right after him. Some really confusing but otherwise negative attacks on Donald Trump. Yet his campaign has chosen to sort of dodge the issue. And so if he wants to put the spotlight back on him, he's going to draw a clear contrast with his vision of the party and America compared to what Donald Trump has said and done as president.
That dinner is tonight, by the way, the Lincoln dinner, and we'll have an ear on it for you. Let you know what happened in Des Moines if it's worth reporting. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino stay with us, our signature panel, as we turn to what happened late last night in Congress. A lot of airplanes taken off. The lawmakers are gone. Did they get anything done? We'll take a look at the House and the Senate because they are two, as it turns out, very different answers.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
So Washington, D.C. is a ghost town once again as lawmakers fly home in the heat for the August recess and the playground of town halls, fundraisers, and Codels, depending on who you're talking about, waiting for them. But do they have anything to show for their work? In the Senate, yes, in fact, they finished. How about this? After Rick Davis's own heart, they finished all 12 appropriations bills and passed the annual defense authorization last night. Feeling pretty good getting on the plane. The House finished one of 12, and left town arguing about the rest, making us all wonder about what the heck is going to happen when they come back. As far as the Senate is concerned, though, they did clear that annual defense authorization, which is a pretty big deal, especially knowing it got bogged down to the extent that it did in the U.S. House with a lot of amendments that were aimed at so-called woke policies in the Pentagon. We talked about it on Bloomberg with Senator John Cornyn just yesterday, as a matter of fact, talking about getting through not only the NDAA, but this blockade on military promotions that Senator Tommy Tuberville continues to promote. Here's Senator John Cornyn.
Until Senator Schumer decides to break the ice by filing for cloture on a nomination, or there's some other resolution at the Department of Defense, we could put this policy on the floor of the Senate and take a vote of the Senate, and then Congress would be speaking to whether this is warranted or not. Right now, the Department of Defense is, I think, taking actions which I believe are in conflict with the Hyde Amendment.
The old Hyde Amendment. And so at some point, these will go into conference committee, and it's not clear what form they will take. We reassembled the panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick, what's the final product look like here? Or I'm assuming we get a final product despite protests from Republicans in the House.
Yeah, I think the protests in the House is absolutely one of the things that would result from this. But the other thing that is left out of the conversation by Cornyn's solution, sure, you could take these one by one. There are only 300 stacked up by now, so the entire fall could be voting one by one on staff officers for the military. But the problem with that is you turn them into judges, right? And we already do that for federal judges, and they become political tools to be used every time some senator has a special interest that no one's paying attention to. And so the real question is, do we really want to turn the leadership of our national defense into a political ping pong ball in the United States Senate every time we want to appoint someone as a senior ranking officer? And I think there's clearly a fundamental problem with that is only going to be solved by either the Defense Department changing their policy or Senator Tuberville changing his hold.
What's your take on this one, Jeanne? I'm going to ask you next about a government shutdown. So I don't know which one comes first. But Chuck Schumer doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to bring all of these to the floor and set a new precedent.
That's right. And it's for the reasons that Rick just talked about. I mean, you can imagine going forward, you have a Democrat, you have, any number of the 100 senators come out and hold up every single one of these things for a pet project that they feel strongly about. That would just tie up the Senate. And let's just go back for a minute to the Hyde Amendment, because that bars federal funding for most abortions. This policy of the DOD is reimbursing travel expenses, not abortions. And let's not forget, when you are in the military, you don't have a choice as to where you are stationed. And this is for our national security, as we saw the Chief Justice say in this last big decision. You have to allow for diversity in the military because it is critical that they are appealing to the entire nation to serve. And so how do you get women and men and husbands and wives to serve 18 to 24, 25 years old if they can't travel for their own health care to do something that's legal? So it is an enormous problem, and Tommy Tuberville is taking it out on the wrong people because there are over 200, almost 300 people now who are impacted by this, and they will not get that money made up whenever this is resolved. Even if they get those promotions, they don't get that money back.
So, Rick, what happens when everybody comes back to town? We'll get through Labor Day. Lawmakers stream back in. Does the math that I already mentioned here, 12 appropriations bills already clearing in the Senate, only one in the House, essentially guarantee a shutdown? And we talked to Chris Van Hollen about this, of course, the Democrat from Maryland. Here's how he put it.
If we do need additional time, which I hope we won't, then we should have a continuing resolution rather than move to a government shutdown. I'm very worried. You hear House Republicans talking about shutting down the government if they don't get their way, even though they're the ones that have ripped up the agreement that Speaker McCarthy reached with the president.
It's kind of sounding like, even if we get a CR, that a shutdown is a foregone conclusion, Rick.
Yeah, hard to tell. I think there is obviously the bailout is a continuing resolution, and you negotiate how long that continuing resolution will last, and it gives you some more time. You're right. There's no way they're going to do 11 individual appropriations bills in 3 weeks before September 30th. So that part is probably off the table. But you could do like what we generously on Capitol Hill call a minibus or an omnibus, which is packaging a group of those 11 appropriations bills, or all of them that are left outside of the defense bill, and putting them into a package that then gets an up or down vote. And that's a way to actually get your job done. The bad news with that is during the course of Speaker McCarthy's election, there were all kinds of deals cut not to do those kinds of things. Yeah. Now, they've already done things that they said they weren't going to do, so I don't know why this would be any different. But the reality is there are options. It's going to take some leadership from McCarthy and some direction, because right now I don't get the impression that there's a plan in leadership to actually pass a budget.
Listen to the senator from Louisiana, Jeanne, for the Republican view on the real problem here in this budget debate. He also talked to Bloomberg.
Their favorite form of spending is more, because they think the federal government has all of the answers. And the second group of people and I'm in the second group, are worried about the staggering debt that we are incurring and its impact on the American economy. And that's the disagreement.
I only have 30 seconds left here, Jeanne. Is the Democrat favorite form of spending more, as he says?
No, and they made a deal, and it is really Republican on Republican disagreement that is leading to this, and the fact that you've got a Freedom Caucus in the House that is saying, we don't care if there's a shutdown. It's fine. It won't impact anybody. Yeah. That's the real problem.
In fact, they're asking for it in some cases. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino with some final thoughts on decorum in the Capitol after one House member curses out a group of pages late at night. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Derek Van Orden says he has no apologies after the congressman from Wisconsin, a former Navy SEAL, went off on a group of young Senate pages. As the story is told, 16, 17-year-old pages, cursing them out early Thursday morning in the House Rotunda. It was just after midnight, for apparently lying on the floor. And it's common that pages do that, cool their heels, rest a little bit in the Rotunda on late nights of work, which this one was. Now, I can't actually tell you what he said because we're on the air. Wake the up, you little... What the are you doing? Get the out of here. You're defiling the space, you... Who the are you? It's hard... So I can't tell you what he said, but you can use your imagination. And the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, talked about it on the floor.
What that congressman did last night at midnight was just utterly despicable. And it's not even worse, but compounding the injury. He doesn't even apologize to them. What the heck is the matter with him?
I don't know. If you look at Twitter, there are pictures of his office of wine, empty bottles of alcohol in the garbage can, on the table in the office. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, I need your input on this. Rick, you spent enough time on Capitol Hill to know. Did those pages do something wrong?
No, and I'd never mess with the pages. They know everything.
Right.
I think that this was also rebuked by Mitch McConnell. I mean, this is a bipartisan rebuke, right? I mean, this guy, look, being a Navy SEAL does not give you an excuse to use profanity in the chamber, and certainly not on teenagers. He should be ashamed.
I don't know if the wine had anything to do with it, Jeannie. They said they had 50 guests they're showing around, and it's a lot of people, I suppose. But you know what it's like to work with teenagers who are hard at work. What lesson did they learn?
Well, it's easier to work with kids at 16 and 17 than it is to work with the representative. And just when we thought it was safe to send our kids to Capitol Hill for some civics. But Joe Mathieu, boy, that was quite a reading. I am very, very impressed that you didn't slip.
I didn't finish one sentence. Jeanne,
Oh,
Sheehan,
no.
Zaino, and Rick Davis, good luck in 100 degrees, whether it's New York or Washington. Our great and signature panel here on Sound On.
Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.